Hello and welcome to the SICSS Festival. This festival is part of SICSS, the Summer Institutes for Computational Social Science. I'm Matt Salganik and I'll be the host of today's event. The mission of the Summer Institutes in Computational Social Science is to provide open, high-quality training in computational social science to researchers around the world in order to accelerate the growth of the field and ensure that it develops practices that are in the long-term interest of science and society. Each summer since 2017, we have offered 2-week summer training programs for graduate students, postdocs, and junior faculty interested in computational social science. Summer institutes offer both social scientists and data scientists, broadly defined. So far, we have provided this free training to more than 700 participants around the world. This event that you're attending right now is part of the first ever SICSS Festival, which provides a chance for our alumni to host tutorials and participate in discussions of interest to computational social scientists. In this event, we'll be having a discussion with Ryan Gallagher and Helby Petersen and Carsten and Schwemmer about open source software as part of an academic career. So first, I want to provide a little bit of information about the ground rules. This event is going to take place over the course of an hour. The plan is that I'll be having a discussion with the panelists for the first 30 to 45 minutes, and then we'll transition into a period where it's questions from the attendees. So to ask your questions, there are 2 ways that you can do this. One is you can put them into the chat window. At the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a button that says chat. You can type your questions into there as we go. And then also, if you want, you can raise your hand and ask your question over video, if you prefer. So we know some people prefer chat, some people prefer video. We'll provide both options. And it will be clear later in the talk when we're going to have this transition to taking questions from the audience. Also, I want to remind you that this talk is being recorded and we will post it on the SICSS Festival website and the SICSS YouTube channel. We're recording the talk so that people who are not able to attend can still benefit from the ideas that are shared here. So with that background, let's get on now to the main event. I'm delighted to introduce to you all 3 really amazing panelists who all have developed open source software and who are all very passionate about this topic. Our first panelist is Ryan Gallagher. He's a PhD student in the network science program at Northeastern University and a member of the Communication, Media, and Marginalization Lab. His research focuses on how individuals use online communication networks to amplify their voices and how that affects hashtag activism, polarization, and misinformation. To do so, he also makes use of methodological advances in network science and working with text as data. During his PhD, Ryan was an intern with Facebook Core Data Science, where he worked on identifying inauthentic coordinated information operations. Ryan's open source projects have been in Python, and they have included CoreX topic model and word shift visualization. Ryan was a participant at SICSS-Duke 2018 and an organizer of SICSS-Boston 2019. So also, as I'm introducing the people and in some of these discussions, we'll hear, for example, people will mention open source software projects or other things. One of my co-organizers, Ian Lundberg, will then put those in the chat so that you can click on those links. So if you want to, he's now going to put Ryan's packages into the chat so that if you want to learn more about them, those will be available. And so throughout, we'll be putting things into the chat so that you can have a record. And then also at the end of the event, we will send you an email with a feedback form so you can help us improve the festival and provide feedback to the presenters. And in that email, we will also include a collection of all of these links that are shared during the event. Okay, so welcome, Ryan. Our second panelist is Anne Helby Petersen. She is a PhD fellow in biostatistics at the University of Copenhagen. Her research aims to develop new statistical methods for integrating data-driven methods with more classical theory-based methods for causal inference in a life course setting. She specifically focuses on methods for causal discovery, that is, for inferring causal relationships from observational data. Her methodological research is motivated by and applied to Danish register data and cohort data to obtain a better understanding of social and health trajectories leading to diagnoses of depression. Anne's open source projects have been in R, and they include DataMade, Causal Disco, PCA DSC, and she's also developed R Shiny apps, Causal Disco web tool, and Auto Poet, a haiku generator. Anne was a participant at SICSS-Duke 2018. Our third panelist is Carsten Schwemmer. He is a senior research associate working in the field of computational social science at Princeton University and the University of Stuttgart. His research focuses on applying computational methods for ethnic minority and gender studies, digital media, political communication, and socio-technical systems. He is particularly interested in methods related to natural language processing, image recognition, and data mining. Carsten's open source projects have been in R, and they include STM Insights, ImageRec, and Pathways. Carsten was a participant at SICSS-Duke 2018 and was an organizer of SICSS-Bamberg 2019. So please join me again in welcoming these amazing panelists. What I'd like to do, I know each of you have worked on several open source packages, but I was wondering if you could, and we can start with Anne, pick a package that you've developed and tell us the story of that package. Like, how did it get started? What was it like to develop? What was it like to maintain? And how is this package being used now, and how is it related to your work? So Anne?
Okay, I guess I can talk about my very first package actually, which was called DataMate, which is also the biggest package that I've been developing. And for me, it was really a lucky coincidence because I was just started my first job after I graduated with a master's degree in statistics. And I was a research assistant. I was supposed to do like biostatistical analysis of some empirical data, but there was no data. So we had to wait for the data. And then my supervisor on the project, he was like, would you have any interest in maybe developing some R programming, some R package? And I was very excited to just start there. So instead of, usually when you get a lot of, you get some new data, you have to do a lot of validation and checking and cleaning and all that stuff. And what my supervisor at the time wanted to do was to automate that kind of process and also document it better. So he had sort of an idea of what he wanted. And then he asked me to just be like the programmer who actually implemented it. And that was just a very nice way to get started because he knew like the package fundamentals. He'd done R packages before, but I still got to actually get my hands dirty with the code and try to do it. Yeah, and it's been a lot of fun actually maintaining it and developing it further. I think we've gotten some sort of a user base, at least dozen downloads in GitHub and also on CRAN where it's located. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Anne. There's a couple of themes that I'm sure we'll come back to there as we hear from the other panelists. Maybe we can go next to Ryan, where you could describe one of your packages and talk about it. But I love how that package started from a happy accident. So Ryan?
Yeah, so I'll talk about my word shift package, Shiftorator, which is a Python package for making interpretable text visualizations of text data. And so this project started with my advisors from the University of Vermont, where I did my master's. And they, quite some time ago now, they came up with a pretty cool way of visualizing how two texts differ in terms of their sentiment. So if you use dictionary-based sentiment analysis, how can we tell how they're actually different? And they would always be talking about like, oh, we wish more people would use this. You know, another paper would come out and it'd do sentiment analysis and you wouldn't actually be able to be confident about what's going on. And they would lament this, and I would too. And I realized, so I had to make one of these word shift images for myself, figures for myself. And it was actually a lot of work. It's really just kind of a horizontal bar chart at the end of the day. But there's a lot to kind of like get everything in the right place, get the labels to line up. And so, you know, I ended up kind of just looking at this like, maybe I should be the one who makes this tool. And so around the same time, one of my advisors there, Peter Dodds, he came up with a generalization of this visualization, so how to kind of expand it. And so it was kind of a nice opportunity to try and turn this into a package and try to develop this. And so this was the first time I really tried to put together a package from scratch by myself. And one of the main motivating reasons I worked on it was we submitted kind of the proposal of this idea to the conference text as data, and we got accepted for that. And so I did a lot of work to kind of pull it together for that conference. And ever since then, I've kind of maintained that code and continued to develop it. And so it's been a huge learning experience for me. Tons to learn about, you know, the proper way to kind of document your Python code, to write out your classes, you know, how to build documentation that can be hosted online, things like this. And I think that's been really beneficial for me to kind of working with other people on other projects. It helps me maintain the code and help collaborate with other people to make sure we're all on the same page. And so recently it happened to get a lot of attention. There was a person who works at Kaggle who decided to make a blog post about it, which was pretty cool. And so I've been trying to keep up with some of the more attention that's been coming for that and just develop some new features for it. But I also use this in my own research to help me understand my own text as data work.
Great, thank you, Ryan. That's an amazing story. We heard some themes that overlap with Anne's story and also some new ones. So now let's go to Carsten and hear the story of one of his packages.
Sure, hi everyone. So I'll be talking about my package STM Insights. That's basically a package about inspecting and validating a particular version of topic models, the structural topic model. And basically, the idea for the package came to mind out of my own interest. So I was increasingly using topic models and that particular version of topic models for my own research. And people who work with topic models might know already that validating them is very important in order not to read tea leaves, but it's also a huge time investment. So the manual approach of copy pasting the same lines of R code over and over again were increasingly annoying to me, and I decided to create a package. It was my first package, and I had no idea about open source software development whatsoever. So it was also a huge learning experience, but over time it got better, it got more features. And now it's, for one, a big shiny app in R, so with an interactive interface, but it also has some features for data extraction, which might be useful for other people. So over the years, I think it was increasingly used by a couple of people. I'm getting quite positive feedback, and one of the cool things is that now other people are also starting to contribute to the package. So one person, for instance, was implementing features that never came to my mind when I actually created the package, which was a totally awesome experience for me. And also I was very surprised to read that there was actually a state agency using the package for some internal research stuff, which was kind of cool. Yeah, so I'm still maintaining it.
Great, thank you. So I noticed that one theme across all three of the panelists' stories was that the process arose out of their own research. And it mixed a combination of trying to make your own life easier and also trying to help other people. So I'm wondering if you could talk about in your package development, how you think about this. Do you think these are sometimes in tension? Do you think they actually support each other? So for example, Carsten mentioned people contributing new things, that potentially makes your own life easier. But like when you're doing your development, how do you think about what you're doing for yourself and what you're doing for others and finding the right kind of balance between that? So maybe Anne, you look like you're ready to talk, and Carsten, I know you looked excited about that one too.
I think so. So the person I'm thinking about when I'm developing stuff is mostly like future me, because future me is going to be super annoyed at past me if I don't try to anticipate the kind of options they would want. So like, even if you're doing it just for yourself, then thinking like a programmer and trying to do more general solutions, I think is so nice. Yeah.
I really like the future me approach. I've never thought about it that way. I'm thinking about collaboration. So for many of my research projects, for instance, I would be the more, let's say, technical person doing more of the computational lifting and the background, whereas other persons might have more, let's say, substantial knowledge. And so I try to design, for instance, STM Insights in a way that also people with less technical expertise could actually use the features, which makes it easier to collaborate afterwards. Sorry, one more thing. Increasingly, maybe Anne and Ryan also experienced this. There will be feature requests, let's say on GitHub, about this new feature X and this new feature Y. And I think it's just a consideration. Might this be useful to a broader audience or for myself? Or is this just one tiny thing which might be cool, but would actually take a lot of time? And in these cases, I would encourage the people to actually implement these feature requests themselves.
I also like the kind of future me framing. So I find a lot of times that what is going to make my life easiest with making the code should hopefully also make someone else's life easy. There has been a time where past me was the motivation for why I made something. So one project I work on, which is the Quarks topic model, was a project that was already in development when I started working on it as a research assistant. And I worked on it for an entire summer. And towards the end of the summer, I kind of got to this point where I was doing a lot of tasks with the code that were kind of complicated and kind of like not straightforward. And so I made code changes, and I made a tutorial for kind of past me what I wish had been implemented, but wasn't at the time.
Cool. I love this idea of the future me because I think it does a great job of potentially breaking down this dichotomy about whether this package is for me or it's for other people. Because I do think there is a tension underlying open source software where in an academic setting, and maybe you all have experienced this as well, some of your colleagues encourage you not to undertake this effort because they say it's not rewarded, it's not encouraged, it's not supported. I see you all nodding. But yet you all continue to do this. So I'm wondering how you strike this balance, how you think about this balance. Like, do you think these people are right and that you really shouldn't be doing this? Or do you think they're wrong and there are reasons that you're doing it that other people maybe can't see from the outside who haven't been doing the things that you all have been doing? So how do you respond and think about the feedback that you get that this is not a good use of your time? Anyone want to?
So I understand people who say that. So I enjoy the packages that I develop, and I'm fairly proud of how they've come together, but they've also taken a lot of time. And that's both time, you know, just developing them, but there's also kind of a lot of other time costs that come up, you know. So like Carsten mentioned, people will come in with feature requests. It's great when people contribute, but if you're one of the main developers, then you need to look that over before you kind of merge it with your own code. And so I think that can be a lot of work. One way that I've found that can make it easier or maybe more like academically worth it is if you can tie the code to some kind of like publication. So with the CoreX topic model, we have a paper for that, and so it's a methods paper. I just released some other code where we tied it with the paper, and we're working on a preprint for this word shift code. And so that kind of helps because when those papers themselves are about the method, so if you were just to write the paper, because that's something that you're doing, you might put it out there and people might want to use the method, but if you don't make the code, a lot of the times, if it's these advanced methods, it can be really hard for people to implement them themselves unless people are going to use them. And so it can be a lot more time to write the code so other people can use it, but I think it also, it gives you more impact academically, which is always nice. It's nice to get citations, things like that. But also just, you know, it's more of an impact in that kind of the open source world, you know, because a lot of people who use it will not be academics. It also has a lot of use among people who might just be data scientists in government or industry.
And I think you wanted to respond also, and I see Carsten was nodding while Ryan was talking, but how do you think about this response that you sometimes hear that this isn't a good use of your time?
Well, first of all, I agree a lot with Ryan that it is really very useful to try to implement the stuff that the methods that you develop yourself, because that like makes it so much easier for people to get started. But I also think that we're moving towards it becoming easier to actually get like classical academic merits for doing software development. That these software journals where you can do articles, for instance, for that the DataMate package that I mentioned before, we had an article published in the Journal of Statistical Software, and like that's the most high impact journal that I've been working with, because there's a lot of people who read these journals of software, and there's a lot of citations. So even if it's about the metrics, I don't think it's necessarily that much of a problem, at least if you're able to devote the time to actually write an article about it. But if it's just out there on GitHub and you don't promote it and you don't tag it to your journal, then I think that you're not going to get a lot of credit for your time.
Carsten?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with everything said. So if people ask me why am I doing this, well, intrinsic motivation is always a start, right? But when it comes to getting something out of it for academic purposes, tying it to a paper, I think is an excellent way to do so. And Anna also mentioned that there are journals that are specific to software publications where you basically introduce a package, and these journals are well known in some fields. I do have to say though, in the social sciences, some of these journals and also software packages in general, at least from my own personal experience, do not receive the same credit as a conventional paper. So I experienced not only one time where people actually thought about or discussed researches and their citations, and then they noticed that a huge part of that is, let's say, a particular R package, and then they received this credit for that being an R package, not a proper citation or a proper package. So, sorry, a proper article. So I really hope that this will change in the future, because as we all know, writing and maintaining software is time intensive.
So I would like to just ask a quick follow-up, Carsten. Do you mean they were penalized for writing the R package, or that that paper was counted less than it might have been counted for an equivalent paper?
The latter.
That was up. Okay, good. So just to be clear, you were not penalized,
No.
but it is true that I think those contributions are weighted less. I will say I've been in conversations, hiring committees and tenure and promotion committees, where I try to advocate very strongly for the value of open source software. And I think over time, as more and more people who have done that work end up in these positions, they will be in a position to advocate for those things as well. But I really like the way that all of you talked about trying to use the systems that already exist in the academic environment to make the contribution more visible. So as someone who is trying to make the impact of your work visible by getting it, for example, published and then getting citation counts. So Anne, you mentioned this Journal of Statistical Software. It may be the case that many of our attendees aren't familiar with that journal, and you have experience, going through that process from start to finish, getting your article published, and then seeing some of the subsequent impact through that publication. So could you tell us a little bit about that process and how other people might go about submitting an article to the Journal of Statistical Software?
Sure. So just first of all, it's if you're using R, then I think you would know the journal, because it's where like large packages are often coded. So it's a journal that focuses on the software side of methods developments. It could be in Python as well, but most of it is R. And I don't think it's necessarily that different from submitting to another journal. So you have to, of course, like write your manuscript, but you also have the package and the package and the code examples that you use in your article are going to be reviewed very closely. So they also try to make sure that this is actual the software is doing what it's supposed to, and that it's helpful and nice, and that it's needed. So you also have to argue why this package is fulfilling something that wasn't already there. So I think it's very similar to all the things you have to go through when you do other types of research. Now you just have to focus it like directly at your software. One problem though with this specific journal is that at the moment their publication time is very long. So I know that this is a problem, especially for young researchers, because the time from you submit to it's all the way through it can be several years, even for something that's accepted in the first run. So yeah, there are also some problems about doing it like this, because software develops a lot over the scope of some years. So you'll have to keep revising it just because the software went somewhere else. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you continue to get academic credit pointed at a piece of software as the software is changing. So do you have to continually update your paper, or how does that work?
Well, I haven't personally done that, but I know that other people then keep on updating the paper. And I think that's an issue because they can't republish the paper, because most of it's the same, but some of it's changed. So sometimes they do like extra papers, or they do some extra documentation, but that is actually a bit of a mess. But I think having it out there in a journal makes it very visible to a large crowd. And that's very useful also for getting feedback and bug reports and feature requests and all that stuff from people that you would never have met otherwise.
Maybe Carsten, and thank you, Anne, and Carsten and Ryan, do you all have experience publishing in other venues other than the Journal of Statistical Software? And could you tell us about that experience? Publishing specifically related to your open source software.
So I haven't had the chance yet to publish through kind of any journal that does code review, which I think, is kind of a shame. That I think there's a lot of code that could use that, specifically when it's kind of methods code. So I've published, with NLP kind of journals, the ones that are associated with the kind of computer science conferences. And so there, the method really is the central thing, but they don't do kind of the validation of the code itself. So I think that's something that would actually be useful if it could be done more broadly, and if it could be done more quickly than a few years.
Same story on my end. No experiences so far with publications which are specifically made for software, but I think it would be a great idea, and especially the analysis methods related stuff can only benefit from that.
Great. So maybe you all have gotten, I would guess the speakers have gotten a lot of people interested in starting to contribute to open source software. Maybe some of the attendees are interested, they want to help and participate. What are some advice that you have for people getting started? And what are ways that people could contribute even without writing software? So for example, you mentioned documentation, bug reports, citing papers. Like, what are some ways that people could get started and help the full range of options that they might have? And any advice you have for them to get started? Ryan, would you like to?
Sure, yeah. So I think it's one of those things that, you know, if you're thinking about trying to make open source software, then you're probably ready to just try and do it. You know, no one's really, there's no like yes or no, you're ready to do it. And a lot of it, all of us are doing is learning on the way. And that can be really scary, and it can be really just frustrating. But I think just kind of dipping your toes into it is the best way to go. You know, if you don't want to develop something like a full software package, there are plenty of packages out there, and a lot of them are on sites like GitHub. And if you go to their open issues, a lot of packages will mark them with things like, this is an issue that would be good for a beginner to kind of tackle. This is not a really complicated thing, but someone just hasn't had time to kind of fix it yet. And so that can be a good place to start. I think I haven't done as much of that, but I also understand that those can be places to get a lot of good mentorship on just how to develop packages, on how to kind of write better code that can be maintained so that it can be used by other people. Yeah, even if you don't develop the code yourself, if you're using open source code, I always really appreciate the feedback on it. I appreciate when people find a bug and raise it. It's a little stressful because, like, you know, then you feel like you really gotta fix it. But yeah, if the bug is there, then it's probably because I hadn't come across it yet. And so even those kinds of things, even if you're not contributing the code yourself, bringing them up can be really helpful.
Great, thank you, Ryan. And maybe, do you have any thoughts about how people should go about getting started, or what they can do to help contribute to open source software community?
I agree a lot with the stuff that Ryan said. And I also think that with the bug reports, I really appreciate it when people do a bug report. I'm super excited, like someone used my software and they did it enough to actually find something that's non-standard in some way. So please do bug reports. Most developers will be thrilled to see them, especially if they're not maintaining hundreds of packages. And also, I think this has also started me writing bug reports on other people's packages. And that's where you learn a super useful skill, which is writing minimal reproducible examples. So something that just gets the bug there, but nothing else. And I think that's something that's super key if you want to develop your programming skills, being able to like locate where is stuff going on. So I think it's good. It's a nice way to practice your programming also. And another thing, I think you should also make use of the fact that open software is available online. You can see all the source code. So if you have a package that you like, go to the GitHub repository, click around, see what it looks like, because it's not as weird or magical or strange that you think. It's just a bunch of often confusing R code or Python code or whatever.
Great, thank you. And Carsten, do you have any thoughts about getting started or how people can help?
Yeah, so I also agree with everything that Anne and Ryan said. And the part about the reproducible examples just struck me because, and now I remember how I actually learned to contribute to open source software, which was exactly that. So the first step was just finding problems or missing features in other software packages and communicate with the maintainers and find reproducible examples, for example. And this is also the first step to not only applying code, but actually understanding how the code works, as Anne mentions, right? So how is the function in the background set up? And this, I think, is one of the first steps to get started. Another thing is, at least in my opinion, that you do not necessarily have to write actually new code to contribute to open source. projects. So for example, fixing problems in the documentation or enter new doc strings for functions is a great way to start, because what this usually teaches you is how to work with software repositories. So for example, learning what is a pull request in GitHub and how this stuff can be used to write software collaboratively is also a big part of learning how to contribute to open source.
Great, thank you. So I love again how all the speakers talk about helping make a contribution to others is also a big part of you learning yourself, making a contribution, improving your skills as a software developer. You all mentioned that high quality bug reports seem really valuable, both to receive and to create. If any of you have any tips on, or could point to a blog post or anything else that you've seen about how to write a good bug report, please feel free to put that into the chat window, or let us know and we can include that in the email. We're about to switch over into the point where the attendees can ask questions. I see some questions are already starting to come in. That's great. Attendees, please start adding your questions into the chat window, or we'll also have a chance for you to use the raise hand feature in Zoom to ask your question. But before we move over to that more audience-driven part, I do want to ask if you have examples of, any of the panelists have examples of open source software packages they've given up on, and if you have advice for what are things that people should not do. Because I think all of you got to talk about the package that you love, the most successful example, but it's also the case that a lot of open source software fails and doesn't get used. And so I'm wondering if we can just help give people kind of a more realistic expectation of, for them to kind of know that there will be some struggles in this process as well. So is there any, failure stories that you want to share, or advice about what not to do? Maybe Carsten and then Anne.
So one thing I learned the hard way is that when you're providing wrapper packages around other software, or let's say other data sources, in particular APIs, application programming interfaces, you can expect your package to be useless at some point in time. For instance, if the API shuts down or if it completely changes. So in that case, I would consider if it is worth the effort, or if you trust that whatever data source you're linking to will be up or will be available long enough so that you and other people could benefit from it. And another perspective I have is, I guess it depends on whether it is for the own personal use or for academic purposes and academic careers. And regarding academic careers, I would try to think of the risk involved. So is this a paper with, let's say, potentially low risk and low time effort, which can net you a little bit, or is it high risk or a high reward package, which with a nice corresponding article could be very good for your academic career? And then I guess you just have to weigh whether the risk is worth it or not.
And you look like you had some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a project at a point in time where I wanted to do like this super big structure of the package. I had the greatest idea. I wanted to do one easy interface to a lot of different nice packages. And I went very conceptually about it, and I draw diagrams, and I thought about objects, and I had a very, I tried to take the software developer approach to it, and that was just a horrible idea, because I'm not a software developer. I know what's useful for actually doing data analysis in practice. So I would really recommend start with what you want to do and then build from there, because if you try to do it too conceptually, you're just gonna get a lot of problems, because most of us don't have the training to anticipate all those software development issues that come along. So rather just have something that works and that you can test, and then go from there, then do it the other way around. Yeah.
Sounds like great advice. Ryan, and then after Ryan responds to this, I'll be reading some from the questions. So again, you can type your questions into the chat window. You can also use the raise hand feature in Zoom to raise your hand, and then you can ask the question directly. Also, I want to remind you all that the panel is being recorded. So if you want to ask a question, this will be recorded. So Ryan, things to avoid, examples of failures.
So I mentioned this word shift package, which I actively maintain now and I've been working a lot more on. But it started almost 2 years ago, and a lot of the work was in preparation for this conference that I mentioned, Texas Data. And I did just so much work getting the code ready for it, and I was the only one working on it. And by the time I got to the conference, I presented it, and then like I didn't want to look at the code ever again because I was just so burnt out on it. I was kind of sick of it. I was frustrated with a bit of like how I had developed it. So Anne was talking about, you know, kind of get something that's working, and I had something that was working, but then it was like hard to extend it. And so I actually took almost 1.5 years off from the code, and it's only been recently that I've started working on it again as I've had space from it. And I think the big things I learned from working on it then was, you know, don't overextend yourself too much. So kind of like how Carsten was saying, if you were to develop something that's, you know, kind of wrapping around an API, that's going to be a lot of work. If it's used widely, people are always going to be asking you, you know, to fix it, to make updates on it, and you don't want to have to work on code that you don't actually like, and that's just kind of ruining your life. And the other thing is to ask for help if you can. So now I've been able to get some more help on just kind of fixing up issues with this package, making some updates, and it's really nice to be able to, you know, be working with someone else or to have someone else put in the pull request to make the update to the code. And that's made working on this package much more enjoyable compared to when I was working on it about 2 years ago.
Great, thank you so much. And Ryan, the first question really builds on your response here. You mentioned the Text as Data conference, and you know, Anne mentioned the Journal of Statistical Software. Are there other conferences where you can present open source software as a way of getting academic credit for your work that have a shorter timescale than the Journal of Statistical Software? This is a question from Zanelle.
So I think if you're in computer science or you're adjacent to computer science, they're always open to kind of these methods and, you know, the associated code with them. So a lot of people will dig into the code. I'd say if you're more on the social science side, one option you might have is something that's more like a tutorial. So if you have some code, this is a method that you like and you think people should be using it, then something you can propose at a lot of conferences is something like a tutorial session. So you not only tell people like this code exists and like here's what it does, but then you actually kind of sit down with them and you help work through examples and how to use it. And I think that could be, I haven't had the chance to do that yet, but that is something I'm hoping to do more, particularly with this word shift package.
All right, thank you. So we have a lot of questions, but there's some common themes. So I'm going to do my best to bundle them together into themes that the panelists can respond to. So Brian and Eshin both have a question that's related to reward and academic advancement structures. So one is about what role you see yourself in changing the culture and mindset of academia to kind of reward this work more. Do you think of yourself as someone who's actively working to change norms, and how might you do that? And then related is it more appropriate in the existing setting to be the author of a single or several small number of packages rather than being a heavy contributor to several packages and the author of none? So all of you are authors of packages. You may also contribute to packages, but could you talk about like ways of taking the amount that you've contributed and making it the most valuable within the existing mindset? Or whether we should change that mindset altogether. Carsten, would you like to take that one? And Anne and Ryan, you can jump in after if there's anything you'd like to add.
Okay, so first part of the question was about, what was it about again?
It was about changing the mindset. Like, do you see yourself as trying to change the mindset? And then second would be, how is the best way to package your open source software kind of within the existing mindset? So like having one or two packages that are widely used versus being a contributor to 20 packages, but not the author of those packages.
Thank you, Matt. So for the first part, I definitely see myself as a person who tries to change how academia thinks about software development and how it should be seen in the future. So I basically have no problem with blaming and other people who are not citing software packages, for instance, which is something that I think is hugely important for the open source community, right? So I mean, even if you do not have a paper in, let's say, the Journal for Statistical Software, R packages, but also Python packages can and should be cited. And I think just regularly doing that on your own, but also mentioning that to other scholars is a start. As for the second part of the question, I think there's a difference between creating a package and contributing to a package, right? So in terms of the academic career, I think it would be more beneficial to rather create a small set of packages and potentially have articles that you can link to them in comparison to contributing to a large set of packages, because for some reason, this is hard to mention contributions still and get credit for it. At least that's my impression at the moment. I also would hope that this changes. Yeah, but short, I think it would be better to rather be an author of a small set of packages rather than contribute to many packages, at least for academic career purposes.
Anne or Ryan, would you have anything to add, or I can move to another question? Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
So I agree with that. If you're looking for academic contributions specifically, then probably you're better off on being able to develop something yourself and being able to tie something like a paper to it. But the reason you might also do smaller contributions that you can't maybe get citations for, I think are different than what you would make a bigger package for. You know, so small contributions can be just to help a package. It might be a package that you use often. It might be a package that you just enjoy contributing to, you like the community around. And so it's worth just like asking yourself, you know, like why, like what do I want to get out of contributing? Do I want academic credit? And what's in that sense, you might want to make your own code, or do I just want to help this community? And that's, you know, we need those people too, even though it is hard to get credit for that. And one way I try to normalize at least my package development is, you know, I put it on my CV. I have a section under my service that is open source software. I link to it on my academic website. I try to make it kind of a big part of my academic identity. So this is a thing that I do. And I try to mention it in conversations, you know, when I'm talking about other people, like, can we schedule this meeting? Usually it's not like, no, I'm working on this package, but, you know, I say, okay, well, I've been working on this, so maybe we can meet like later today or something like that. So it is part of my research routine and kind of like a regular part that I bring up.
Okay, let's move on to another question. Actually follows right from Ryan's answer about being a part of a community. So Mario asked, do you have ideas about how to develop communities that use and contribute to the packages that we're building, including possibly making tutorials? So you all create this software, you want it to be used. You mentioned you love getting bug reports. What are some strategies that you use to build communities around your software? Anne?
Yeah, So I've actually done some of these workshops or tutorials and conferences, and I found that super useful both for me in order to like try out the package in practice, but also it seems like it's a nice way to introduce it to a big audience. So that's something I could definitely recommend. But that's, of course, if you have like a bigger project. But also just talking about it on Twitter or wherever your platform is for discussing these things. The tech people are super active in there, so there's a lot of possibilities to share it. Also, if you're doing R, then there's the R blog. I forget what it's called. R blogger, maybe. Carsten knows. That also just shares every blog that's tagged at their place. So it's super easy actually to sort of spread the word and try to build something around it.
Brian?
I want to second that with, don't be afraid to promote your work on something like social media. I use Twitter a lot, so obviously I'm a little biased here, but I think that's a great way to get the word out about your work. It's a good way to get eyes on it that you would never know even want to see it, and that's been really great for my work. I've had people contribute who I didn't know them before, but they're really interested in the package, and so they make some fixes, they put something in. And the other thing, don't be afraid to, if this is something you work on regularly, don't be afraid to talk about it regularly on social media. You don't have to just like post one tweet and that's it. You're allowed to talk about your work. People want to see you, like, encourage you to work on it. There's a lot of people that want to support you doing this. So if you make a big fix or you make a big change, you make a tutorial, which is one thing. I like making tutorials to help make it easier to make it to use packages. Any of those things are things you can post about, to tweet about, so that people kind of just keep seeing it and they start to associate like this code. This is a thing, one, that they know exists and they associate it with you and that it's your work.
Okay, another question was that seemed to resonate with some other people in the chat is about imposter syndrome. How do you overcome imposter syndrome in the sense of you may consider yourself a beginner or intermediate coder, and you may not feel confident that your code is good enough, is elegant enough, is perfect enough to turn it into a package. So all of you got through that barrier, and you felt like you were ready to put your code out there. How do you how do you overcome imposter syndrome, or how would you encourage other people to overcome that? Okay, Anne raised her hand first, then Ryan, then Carsten.
Well, first of all, I just think that like the bar is really low. Like there is so much bad code out there. I just attended an R conference virtually last week, and I found maybe like 5 or 6 packages that looked super nice, and I tried them out and none of them worked. I couldn't install one, and the other one, it just didn't really. So don't try to make something that works perfectly. It's okay to just put out whatever you have, because other people are doing the same. And that's how we then I would do a bug report and say, well, your package doesn't work, it doesn't install, and then we can go from there. So there's not a lot of expectations on the user side when you do open source software development.
Ryan?
Yeah,
and then
so, right, and so I think kind of building off that, like, coding is very vulnerable. I think it's a very scary and personal thing to put your code online, because a lot of times we write our own scripts and we run them and we have like really messy like copying and pasting, and it's like really not good way of doing research, but we all do it. And so it can be scary though when you try to wrap that all up and put it online for someone else to see. And one thing to keep in mind though is when you do that, it is one of the best ways to help you be a better coder. And so there have been a lot of things that come up in my code that I wouldn't have known to, fix or better document or better structure if I hadn't put it up there. And so I 100% understand how scary it is. It still stresses me out. I can't believe that I have code up there that people like actually look at. But a lot of people who might use the packages, a lot of people who might work on them with you are going to be very understanding about that and are going to want to help you be better. And if that's not the community that you're finding, I think that is a good signal. You just try to find other people you can work with. There are a lot of good people that want to see these projects succeed, that want to help people be better coders and to mentor those people.
Thank you, Ryan. Carsten?
So adding to all of the great things that have already been said, two keywords that popped up in the chat were elegance and efficiency, right? So on that note, I'd like to mention that whether code is elegant or not, I would say is highly subjective. So that's the first thing, right? So you might find a particular set of code elegant, another person might find it horrible. I would say start with try to create something that works and don't care too much, for example, about efficiency, especially when it comes to academia and academic purposes for software. We are often not super concerned for like getting this particular function to work a half a second faster or doing this in the most efficient or elegant way. If it actually works, that's a very good start. And it's also, as the others mentioned, a good start for just improving your skills.
Okay, I think this is actually a really great place to end. We are running out of time, and I think this kind of spirit of going and getting started and remembering this is a learning opportunity for you and finding a community where you want to contribute and where you feel your contributions are valued. I think that's a great way to wrap up this panel. So please now join me in thanking the panelists.